Welcome to Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt of the Marquardt Law Firm at marquardtlawfirm.com.
Welcome back to Talk Law Radio. I'm Todd Marquardt here with Daryl Harris, who is the Chief Prosecutor for the Civil Rights Division in the Bexar County District Attorney's Office. Previous segment, he was telling me about his background, and we went over what the Civil Rights Division does, and we'll talk more in detail about that now. I want to start out with an observation. You're probably a little bit older than me. You've got a little more gray than I do. But you probably grew through the same time period watching a lot of superheroes on TV. Right?
Yes.
Which one has been your favorite?
Oh, God. Probably Iron Man from the day, and this maybe will precede you, but I can remember when the animated cartoons were on regularly in the afternoon. So Iron Man, I'd have to say traditionally. There was another character, the Submariner.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't meet Iron Man until Downing Jr. came out with it, the movie.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I was one of those kids, and yeah, and then you'd heard about in the comics about the Black Panther, but I didn't really grow up with it.
Mm-hmm.
So my guy was the Submariner and Iron Man.
Okay, mine was Batman.
Yeah. And do you remember the Adam West original series?
I started watching that before the Michael Keaton even came out. And
Holy caboose, Batman.
Well, what I wanted to ask you is, could Batman be prosecuted under these civil rights violations for excessive use of force?
Well, I would submit, since he wasn't a law enforcement officer, he clearly could be prosecuted because he didn't have a right to possibly do that which he's doing. Now, if you laid it out and I guess he'd be sitting there in his cowl and costume to not give away his identity, I don't know if anybody'd have luck or success getting the jury to convict him. But take that analogy, and you're starting to see a lot of those kind of fact patterns spring up nationwide with individual citizens with the right to carry, reacting in situations.
Oh, right.
You kind of see it. I know.
Taking matters into their own hands.
Yeah. We watch it and we talk about it amongst ourselves in the office, and you can see it happen nationally. And so, yeah, I think that's as they get looked at. I think yes, that and by that comparison, Batman could.
The reason I would prosecute him as an officer is because Commissioner Gordon called him with the bat signal, and so he was an agent of the office.
And then, and under that context, then that could be something that would probably then fall in my purview.
Right.
Now, but in this area, we have a running dialogue, email, et cetera, with my counterparts in the major cities. Now, one of the things I would tell you out of that our Dallas colleagues say, and they've been doing this about a decade and a half, man, be leery before you get into handling security guard issues as law enforcement. Not every private security guard is a certified peace officer.
Right. And
it's just the analysis and the authorizations to use force, is it truly covered? Yeah, it's potentially a quagmire.
Well, I remember learning in law school that you could make a citizen arrest,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to be correct. That there's no room for error if you're a citizen.
Along with, our laws still support if a law enforcement officer empowers a citizen or deputizes one. Now, the converse is what happens when people are just trying to, from what they see, that limited perspective, trying to do the right thing, but they may be factually wrong.
Right.
If you look at Chapter 9 of the Penal Code, there is an explicit section. Somebody acting under this perceived authority to act can't claim it if they mistakenly injure an innocent third party. So that just in and of itself tells me our laws contemplate this conflict. We haven't had as much of a concern for it historically, but could be an unseen next wave coming.
Well, my hypothesis in bringing all this up comes from a friend of mine who said when he was watching TV about the Uvalde shooting, there was an image of an officer in the hallway, had his phone out, and you could see on his phone was an image of the Punisher. And so my friend and I were talking about, well, we all grew up with superhero mentality. And of course, some of us would grow to become officers, and we would take some of that perspective with us. And so they kind of, some officers might feel like they're somewhat of a superhero in fighting the bad guys.
Yeah, that's a phenomenon, and people will want to make out of it sometimes maybe more than it is. As a correlation, over my time in service, I was initially commissioned still wearing the old OD green fatigues, and then they moved into the BDUs. And then you notice you started to get a group of recruits consistently that are coming in now with tattoos and body ink. Well, today, law enforcement agencies had to worry about it. For a while, you couldn't have it. And then just because the tide has changed, law enforcement agencies had to adapt. Now you've got in the military, they wear the unicolor sleeve over it, so you have to adapt. I think in general, now we're advocates, and so the law also allows that, you can take photographs of a defendant if there are known gang symbols or gang tattoos, and that can be used in the right way to give perspective or clarity to evidence or testimony. But at the same time, you don't want to make too much out of it because it's so ubiquitous in the culture and the country. Some people see a certain action or reaction, and we've got the Punisher tattoo, therefore that's in your mindset. I don't ever believe that that's dispositive of any one thing. It can be a flavoring. There's a case with a particular tattoo and an individual has a military background. Well, to be perfectly honest, what it means is if you aren't ready, you die. In that previous environment, that's accurate.
Right.
So I don't know. So I don't know. It's not dispositive. That's hopefully our analysis, our investigation, our ultimate decision making come out to have a bit more of a fundamental basis than just body art.
Right.
On the other hand, it's still there, and if the weight of evidence goes a certain way, then somebody has to explain it. So, double-edged sword.
Yeah, let me go back to Batman, the Adam West version. You'll remember Batman facing off against the criminal enterprise, and immediately it goes to blows. Pow, zap, zing.
Yes.
That's really not allowed, right?
An officer by law if he determines he has probable cause to make an arrest, has the authority to use force to make that arrest. Now, quite often that force is expressed or manifest by grabbing an individual, trying to put cuffs on him. The individual may stiffen up, passive resistance. Sometimes if it goes active. So yes, and then we look at what causes it. And this is the other part that needs to be understood. And law enforcement doesn't tend to have what the lay citizen may consider to be a fair fight. If you have to use it quickly and bring it to an end so you can regain control. Mm-hmm. It sounds harsh, but you can't really have the alternative. So, yeah, if Batman thought that the Joker and his henchmen were reasonably about to use unlawful force against them, they can respond with force in their own.
Okay, we've got a caller. David, you're live on the air. What's your question?
Oh, thanks, Todd. Yeah, and your guest, the old phrase "shoot first, ask questions later" shows up in some of the discussion of this. And I remember that city of Chicago, I think they were buried in lawsuits. They had to pay, I think, an average of $60 million a year in police abuse lawsuits. So the taxpayers were paying for bad cops. And apparently the average cop in Chicago pulls out his gun, doesn't use it, but pulls out his gun once every 27 years. So apparently it's a very small number of bad cops that are causing the $60 million in lawsuits. And again, that expression, shoot first, ask questions later, comes up in this. Whether or not you got a bunch of paranoids who are given a gun, or whether or not they're bigots with a gun.
Well, is that a myth, Daryl? Shoot first, ask questions later?
It's an anecdote, and I think if you see that, I can't imagine any jurisdiction where that would not be a potential violation of state law. Here in Texas, as a general rule for any citizen, the only justification to use deadly force is to counteract somebody else's use or threatened use of apparent deadly force. And that becomes something that's that ultimately a trier of fact has to decide. But you can't just use it without it being reasonable. Mm-hmm. So police officers are citizens of the state. They have those defenses or justifications available to them, along with, if they're acting in their authority, and then the ability or the right to use force to effect an arrest. Notice I dropped search out of that.
Okay.
Deadly force to effect an arrest, where you may be attempting to execute an arrest warrant for a violent crime that involves the use of deadly force. Mm-hmm. And we'll obviously continue this after the break.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, David, for calling. Thank you for the question and the topic. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we'll continue talking about when force is justified. So stay tuned.
This has been Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt, brought to you by the Marquardt Law Firm. You can learn more at marquardtlawfirm.com. And be sure to listen to the full Talk Law Radio show Saturday mornings at 11 on 9:30 a.m. The Answer.
Week, attorney Todd Marquardt talks about the law. His mission with the Talk Law Radio show and podcast is to help you discover your legal issue blind spots. In the beginning, God had one law. Don't eat from the fruit of that tree. Then came the 10 Commandments. Now we have federal, state, and municipal lawmakers that won't stop creating new laws. Laws that might impact you without you knowing it. Listen to the show and drop a line on Facebook or email host@talklawradio.com and let the host know what what you think of the show, the topics you want to hear, and whether you want to be a guest.